There is a particular type of man who lingers in a woman's memory long after he has left the room. Not because he chases her, not because he gives her everything she asks for, but because he cannot be controlled. He is an enigma, a fortress, a man who answers to something deeper than her beauty, her moods, or her threats of withdrawal. He is not immune to affection, nor is he a cold sociopath. He simply cannot be owned. In Jungian terms, he is a man who has individuated, who has ventured into the depths of his unconscious, faced the wild beasts of his shadow, and emerged not domesticated, but disciplined. And it is this man, this integrated masculine force, who awakens something ancient in the feminine psyche, desire without domination. Carl Jung's theory of archetypes tells us that deep within the masculine unconscious live four governing forces: the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover. These aren't superficial roles we play. They are psychic energies we must awaken, balance, and wield with awareness. The king brings stability, vision, and order. He doesn't need to dominate because his presence alone commands authority. The warrior is fierce and unwavering, not a bully, but a man who does what needs to be done, regardless of how he's perceived. The magician possesses knowledge and spiritual insight. He's detached from the opinions of the world because he sees beyond its illusions. And then there is the lover, sensual, alive, emotionally attuned. He doesn't fear intimacy, but he also doesn't worship it. The man who fuses these archetypes doesn't need to manipulate or posture. He simply is. He walks into a room and his presence speaks a language that no compliment, text, or romantic gesture ever could. And it is this language, the language of inner power, that women hear even when no words are spoken. Modern men have been tricked into believing that the path to a woman's heart is paved with obedience. Be agreeable. Be predictable. Be emotionally available at all times. Never make her uncomfortable. Always show up. Always say yes. But what this produces is not passion. It is passivity. It breeds men who live on their knees, awaiting permission to be themselves. And while this might win temporary affection, it extinguishes the fire of erotic polarity. The more she can steer you, the less she believes in your ability to steer life. The more she can test you and break your frame, the more she must become the masculine force in the relationship, containing what you fail to contain. And this, over time, suffocates her desire. Women do not stop desiring because men are too harsh. They stop desiring because men become too tame. The feminine energy, in its rawest essence, is chaotic, emotional, fluid, wild. It is not supposed to be still. It flows like a river, testing the banks to see if they'll hold. And here is the ancient truth Jung alluded to, though never quite said this plainly. A woman doesn't test a man because she wants to dominate him. She tests him to feel the strength of his banks. If you collapse, she loses trust. If you react, she loses respect. If you stand firm, not as an act, but as an expression of your essence, she softens. Because the deeper part of her finally feels held, not controlled, not silenced, but safely contained. This is not about toxic masculinity or patriarchal domination. This is not about playing games. This is about understanding the archetypal dance of masculine and feminine polarity. The man she can't control is not heartless. He is whole. He doesn't need her approval because he already has his own. He doesn't fear her storms because he's faced his own. He doesn't bend for validation because he lives in alignment with something higher: truth, mission, inner law. And this is why he is so magnetic. He is not trying to attract, he is trying to become. And in that becoming, he becomes the gravitational pull around which others orbit. It's important to understand this truth. Women don't fall for cruelty, they fall for clarity. The dangerous man isn't attractive because he's reckless, but because he's unshakable. Because he doesn't lose himself in her emotions. Because he doesn't need to control her to feel safe in himself. Jung would argue that such a man has integrated his anima, the feminine energy within himself, and thus He no longer projects his emotional needs onto the women he desires. He doesn't need her to mother him. He doesn't require her praise to feel like a man. He has faced the inner feminine, wrestled with her, understood her, and honored her within. So when the outer feminine appears, emotional, seductive, chaotic, he meets her not with need or resistance, but with understanding and leadership. And in this containment, she feels something most men cannot give her: masculine safety without submission. In contrast, the man who cannot hold his frame, the man who sacrifices his truth for her moods, who fears her disapproval more than his own regrets, will never be truly desired. He might be liked. He might even be loved in a tame, maternal way. But he will not be desired. Because desire is not born from control. It is born from surrender to power. And the only man she can surrender to is the one who doesn't seek to own her, but who will never allow himself to be owned. This is the tragedy of the modern nice guy. He does everything right on paper, yet still finds himself abandoned, overlooked, or cheated on. Why? Because deep down, he is not nice. He is afraid. Afraid to draw boundaries. Afraid to walk away. Afraid to be disliked. Afraid to risk his own identity for the sake of truth. And women, even subconsciously, can smell this fear. They may not be able to name it, but they feel it. The absence of masculine essence, the vacuum of authentic authority. And when that vacuum exists, the relationship slowly collapses into resentment, nagging, and distance. Because she cannot feel herself rise in the presence of a man who is always below her. In the alchemy of lust, you'll be taken deep into the ancient and forgotten discipline of sexual transmutation, a principle once reserved for monks, warriors, kings, and creators. The man she can't control is not a brute force of domination. He is the rarest of beings, a sovereign soul. He has claimed his inner kingdom. He has passed through the chaos of life and made peace with both his wounds and his power. He may love deeply, he may be emotionally available, but he is never available to be changed into something he is not. And this is what makes him both dangerous and divine. He triggers the feminine wound, yes, but he also offers the antidote, a stable mountain she can dance around, crash into, scream at, and return to, without ever moving him from his place. And so, she desires him, not because she can possess him, but because she never truly can. To become the man she cannot control is not to become cruel, closed, or emotionally detached. It is to become centered, rooted like a tree that does not beg the wind to be calm, but holds firm regardless of how the storm rages. This man does not hide behind bravado or artificial stoicism. He feels, but he is not ruled by feelings. He listens, but he does not always agree. He gives, but he never sacrifices his essence. And herein lies the true journey, not of manipulating women or seducing them into admiration, but of mastering the self so thoroughly that her validation becomes a luxury, not a necessity. The first principle of this transformation is boundaries, not walls, not ultimatums, but clear, sovereign borders that define where you end and the world begins. In Jungian psychology, a man who lacks boundaries is often a man who has not integrated his shadow, the repressed parts of himself that he disowns because they conflict with his idea of being good. The nice guy represses his anger, his assertiveness, his selfishness. He seeks peace over truth. But the integrated man makes peace with his aggression. He does not explode, but he is capable. He does not harm, but he will not be harmed without consequence. His no is not laced with guilt. His yes is not bought with fear. And women sense this deeply, because the feminine, in her most primal form, fears the man who has no edge, not because she wants to be hurt, but because she cannot trust a man who refuses to protect himself. The second principle is detachment, not emotional coldness, but psychological independence. Most men fall not because they feel too little, but because they feel too much and lack the framework to contain it. They drown in their own need for reassurance, affection, attention. They become addicted to the woman's presence, or worse, her mood. And slowly, without realizing it, they begin to orbit her like a satellite, spinning further and further from their own purpose. But the man she can't control is not a satellite. He is the sun. And everything in his life, including his relationships, revolves around his mission. His attention is precious because it is not scattered. His love is meaningful because it is not desperate. When he gives you his time, you feel it, because he has so much he could be doing, and yet he chose to be here. Not because he needs you, but because he wants you. And that difference is everything. This is not a game of pickup strategies or alpha posturing. This is archetypal embodiment. Jung taught that a man becomes whole only when he descends into the unconscious and confronts all the fragments of himself, his rage, his fear, his lust, his longing, his feminine, his demons. Most men avoid this journey. They cling to societal masks and emotional numbness. They stay half-formed, boys with beards, seeking mothers in the bodies of lovers. But the rare few take the path of fire. They break themselves down, not to be destroyed, but to be rebuilt with truth. They become men whose emotions do not make them weak, but whose self-awareness makes them unbreakable. Women are not confused by this man. They are challenged by him. And in that challenge, they either rise into their own feminine power, or they leave. And either way, he remains. The man she can't control does not ask, "Will she stay?" He asks, "Will I still respect myself if I make this compromise?" And if the answer is no, he lets go, not to punish her, but to protect the temple of his own integrity. And in doing so, he becomes the very thing she didn't know she needed. A man who won't collapse just to keep her close. The modern dating world is flooded with men who have lost themselves. Social media rewards neediness with attention. Culture confuses emotional availability with emotional dependency. And masculinity has been watered down to a performance of passive compliance. But the women, the real women, not the wounded girls playing power games, are starving for presence. For a man who listens without losing his spine. For a man who touches her soul without needing to be saved. For a man who doesn't flatter her ego, but calls her higher by simply being unshakably himself. This man doesn't compete with other men. He competes with his own previous self. He doesn't chase. He attracts by gravity. He doesn't try to be hard. He is soft where he chooses, and steel where he must be. And that's why she can't stop thinking about him. Not because he did everything she asked for, but because he refused to be molded. Because in a world that bends and breaks for attention, he stood tall, even when it meant standing alone. This is the Jungian man. Not a fantasy, not a myth, but a rare breed of soul. A man who has fused the king, warrior, magician, and lover within himself. A man who no longer seeks to be chosen because he has already chosen himself. And that is why she desires him. Thus remember, we are Indecepta. Becoming Indecepta is the code they never wanted you to learn. A psychological war map for men, forbidden teachings fused with modern strategy for influence, dominance, and self-mastery. If you want peace, prepare for war. The Indecepta archive is the complete vault. Every lesson, every revelation, every psychological blueprint I've ever recorded, handcrafted to help you break chains, build discipline, and become undefeatable in a world built to deceive men. No ads, no algorithms, no distractions.